How do and welcome back. My name is Andrew Hancock and I'm a VMware technical architect from Yorkshire in the United Kingdom. I have worked with the VMware products since their inception in 1998, so that's 23 years I've been working with the VMware product line. Some of you may say if you cut Andy in half it reads VMware like a stick of rock from Blackpool. I've also written over 100 articles for Experts Exchange and won many other awards and accolades. I am honoured to have been accepted into the VMware vExpert program for the last 11 years and more recently a VMware vExpert Pro for the last 2. Okay, so welcome back. Here we go, part 21, and today I'm going to show you how to deploy and install VMware vCenter Server 7. Now I'm not really going to call it vcsa-ui. That's what we really used to tag on to VMware vCenter Server Appliance 6.5 and 6.7 to differentiate between VMware vCenter Server for Windows and the VMware vCenter Server Appliance vCsa 6.5 or 6.7. Because in vSphere 7 vCenter Server for Windows is gone. There is no vCenter Server for Windows, thank God, anymore. So it's an appliance. So it's a Linux appliance based on Photon, which a lot of VMware appliances are based on, if you're familiar with them. So please don't ask questions about where can I find VMware vCenter Server for Windows version 7. There isn't one. I'm sorry, you'll have to man up and get used to the appliance. And there is nothing actually in the appliance that's missing from the Windows version, but there isn't a Windows version anyway. So if you want to upgrade and install vCenter Server 7.0, then it's an appliance. I don't actually have an article for deploying and installing VMware vCenter Server Appliance 7.0 or 6.7, but roughly speaking, it's very, very similar to how to deploy and install the VMware vCenter Server Appliance 6.5. Hereafter referred to as VMware vCenter Server 7, which is based on Linux, which is based on the Photon distribution. So the first thing we actually basically need to do, if you are lucky enough already to have a license for it, then you can go straight to VMware Connect and download your copy of the appliance. I'm actually basically going to use one of my many trial accounts. So this is obviously what the VMware page looks like, and when you log in you'll go to Customer Connect, and I'm doing this live and I'm recording it for the very first time, so we're probably going to get some goofs and gotchas and God knows what else is going to go along the way. I've remembered this time that my Pi-hole DNS servers are not enabled on this workstation, so it isn't going to block any downloads, but who knows what's actually going to happen in the next Hancock's VMware half hour. So, trial and free products. And you would have seen this before when we downloaded back in part 1 ESXi 7 or VMware vSphere Hypervisor 7. So I'm going to click download free trial. And this is where I said before things get a little bit convoluted, because although you've logged in, now you've actually got to register for the product evaluation. And this is actually basically free for 60 days. So you get an opportunity to try all the bells and whistles of VMware vSphere 7 Update 2A for free for 60 days. So I'm going to click the register button. Content not available. Dear user, the web content you have requested is not available. Well, that's a good start. Let me just refresh and find out what is going on. It's possible, of course, that I have used this account before, but it actually says I've not registered for this product. So I'm just going to select view my evaluations. It doesn't say that I've had any. Does it say I don't have any expired evaluations? I don't have any current evaluations. So let's say start evaluation, download free trial, register. The user, dear user, the web content you requested is not available. Okay, maintenance. Now I have seen this. I'm just going to go off and clear my my cache. Cookies, not browsing history. Let's just clear my cache for the moment. And let's just go back to evaluating download free trial. I have seen this before with the VMware website. Occasionally it does not seem to like. So let's cookies and other data. Not going to clear my cookies, I might need them. You know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to quickly spin up Firefox. I have seen this before. I have seen that Chrome does... Oh dear, all sorts of pop-ups going on here. Don't want this, don't want that, don't want the other. VMware.com. See if I can log in. Just let me put this on pause while I try and get logged in. Okay, so I might have known, and I should have remembered that for some strange reason, and this has been going on for many years, Chrome seems to have caching issues or weird issues with the VMware website that always seems to pop up and say in maintenance mode, and things just don't work. Anyway, so this is Firefox, and quite simply, and I wanted to show you this process because I actually wanted to show you how you can get the trial. If you're already a licensed customer, then you would just basically log in, go to the products that you're licensed for, download the ISO. It's not so straightforward, I don't think, if you're signing up for a trial. So effectively, you would need to create an account at VMware. You log into the account, what they call VMware Customer Connect, which used to be called My VMware. Oddly, they've rebranded this portion here saying My VMware Customer Connect, but the URL still says My VMware. But anyway, My VMware Customer Connect, same thing. You click Trial and Free Products, and you get to this page. You click Download Free Trial, which then goes to this page where you have to click the Register button for it. That starts the timer on the 60 days. When you click the Register button, you're going to have to fill in all your details, your address, your telephone number, etc. Do you want VMware sales to call you and chase you to purchase? And then eventually you get this page, which actually basically turns around and shows you download links of where you can basically download VMware vSphere Hypervisor brackets ESXi ISO, which we did in part 1. And here's the VMware vCenter server appliance, and VMware still calls it an appliance, although there is no other option other than, but it does actually say VMware vCenter server there, but then it says VMware vCenter server appliance there. 7.5 gig ISO. So I'm going to click manually download, and I'm going to click save, and I'm going to wait for that to download. And that little icon up there, I'm not familiar with Firefox actually, but that little icon there obviously is showing me that it's downloading something. In previous versions of VMware vSphere, you couldn't actually obtain the appliance as a trial. But of course there is no, you could only get the Windows version in the trial. But obviously in vSphere 7 there is no Windows version, so the only option to give you the ability to try VMware vCenter Server is to give you access to the Photon Linux distribution, aka the appliance. Why do you need VMware vCenter Server? Good question. VMware vCenter Server is a management server that allows you to manage all your ESXi servers from a single pane of glass. And it's not so obvious if you just have a single ESXi host, but there are some benefits. First of all your inventory information and all the performance information is stored forever and summarized in a database. In ESXi,
if you just stand up an ESXi server, the performance information is only kept for 24 hours, and then it's purged, it disappeared. You can't get hold of it. There are other benefits as well. Even if you've got a single server, you can do migrations, although technically a migration would be to another server or a data store. But also templates and deploying templates, another function as well. Plus lots of other management functions that you can use as well. Okay, well, I'm going to put this on pause. I'm going to disappear for a moment. But one thing I will mention, I'm going to bang the gong on this again. Whilst you're actually basically waiting for the appliance to download, make sure that you can, first of all, record down an IP address and create an A record in your DNS for that server. So for instance, we're going to use here vCenter 7.cyrus-consultants.co.uk, and I'm going to give it the IP address 192.168.182.136, and I'm just going to trace a route to vCenter 7.cyrus.consultants. That's it, and as you can see there, it can actually trace route to it, 192.168.182.136. Obviously the server's not been built yet, it's not on. And obviously if I ping vCenter 7.cyrus-consultants, again I can resolve that as well, 192.168.182.136. And also if I do a trace route to 192.168.182.136, then I can also trace a route to it as well. It's very important, and this is why I tried to kind of plant that seed all the way back in part 1, part 2, that you actually basically get used to using FQDNs and DNS entries for VMware vSphere. Your VMware vSphere infrastructure is only as good as your networking and only as good as your DNS. So please, please, please get into the habit of using FQDN and DNS entries. If you carry on using IP addresses, installing VMware vCenter server, it is likely to fail. So from the actual workstation that you are deploying the appliance, VMware vCenter Server 7, ensure that you can do all that. So that does mean that before we even start deploying or downloading, that you have gone to your DNS and you have put in a host name followed by an IP address, and also check as well, and I'm going to go back to our Dell PowerEdge, and I haven't showed you this before, but if you actually basically right click the host and click SSH console, you can get a lovely yes please followed by a password, remember. And this is of course I have actually left SSH enabled and ESXi shell enabled, but again also check from our ESXi host that we can also ping our server or resolve our server as well. Okay, so 192.168.182.136, that is vCenter server 7.cyrus-consultants.co.uk. So we're confident that our ESXi host can also resolve that server. Obviously it can't ping it at the moment because we've not deployed it yet. So we're almost downloaded, but I'm actually basically just going to disappear and I'll come back and speed this up in a post edit, although we've not got much longer to wait for that to download, and I'll be back shortly. So I thought I'd practice what I'd preach, and I've used the MD5 and SHA checksum utility 2.1 by Raymond Lynn to actually basically check the 7.5 gig download, and we can actually basically see quite clearly B933 9CE matches quite happily with the published MD5 sums at VMware. So now what we need to do is we need to mount the ISO, and that's quite easily by just double clicking. If you're on Windows 10 or a later operating system, you can actually basically just double click the ISO in Windows, and it will actually basically mount it as a CD-ROM drive in your computer. And then we're going to execute the installer program, and then we can actually basically start the installation wizard, which will look somewhat like this. Now I noticed I had expected it to mount by now, but I do wonder whether or not that my virus checker Bitdefender has basically intercepted it, and it's now wanting to scan through the contents of the DVD. Because the little circle there is spinning, thinking about doing something. Just let me put this on pause and come back to it. Okay, the delay was actually caused by Bitdefender. Okay, so when we actually double click the ISO, as expected, we'll get a DVD drive, which actually basically shows you the contents of the DVD, and the vcsa-ui installer is this in this folder. So Win32, and then we basically double click the installer. Now I have seen on Experts Exchange when VMware administrators are installing VCSA, they browse the contents of the disk, they find an OVA, and they immediately go into deploy the appliance this way. It's actually the wrong way to do it. If you just deploy the appliance in that way, you won't get any of the configuration information entered actually into the appliance. So the correct way, or the way that I do it, is vcsa-ui installer, Win32, double click the installer.exe, and wait for VMware vCenter Server 7 installer to appear. So we click install a new vCenter server. If you know something about VMware vSphere, you will have heard the term platform service controller before. You could install a platform services controller as a separate appliance to vCenter server. External platform service controller, as it states there, has now been depreciated. So we click next. We accept the license agreement, followed by next, and we enter this is where we enter the deployment target. If this is your first vCenter server installation, and all you've installed at the moment is a single host, then you would put the host name in there, as it says, EXXi host or vCenter server name. Now you can specify a vCenter server if you already have a vCenter server. For instance, you could have vCenter servers that are installed on 2 different clusters and manage different clusters. So we're going to specify our root, and we're going to put in that password, of course, that we created and remembered from part 1.
and we click next. Standard observation, if you're using the standard certificate that's shipped with ESXi 007, this is to be expected, which is the VMware self-signed certificate. So I'm going to select yes. It's now asking me a name for the inventory. So I'm going to call it VMware vCenter Server 7. But again, I'm going to put those dashes in, as I previously said, just to make things a little bit more manageable if we're browsing around the file system at the shell. Set a root password. So I'm going to create, this is the root password for the Linux Photon brackets appliance, followed by next. Deployment size, well, you can clearly see there where it actually basically gives a rough idea of how many hosts, how many VMs and storage. So in this little lab, in this little demonstration, I'm going to say, well, you know, we're going to have a tiny deployment. So I'm going to click next, and I'm going to put it on our flash data store. I'm going to click next. Okay, so this is now where we actually start assigning our IP address. So I've already actually allocated an IP address, and that's our subnet mask, and our default gateway, our DNS servers, and of course our FQDN. Now it says optional. I would recommend that you get used to FQDNs and you put it in, and you won't have any issues with the deployment. So VM network, IPv4, static, and all that can be done before. That's got nothing to do with the installation. Make sure that you can resolve the host name, FQDN, and the IP address before you even start installing. And you must ensure, because if you can't, checks are now made when you click next, and if it can't resolve any of that, it will fail. So I'm now just going to have a quick look over the deployment details. We want to deploy to our Dell PowerEdge R730, our ESXi 007 server. That's its inventory name, tiny, default, thin. So I'm going to click finish, and it's actually going to start deploying. If we just have a quick check on our server, you can see already that the inventory object has been created, and if we go back to our installer, it's slowly deploying. So I'm going to wait for that to deploy. It does take several minutes, and then I'm going to come back when we actually start getting to the next few parts and take you through those. So I'll just turn off cam and the mic as normal, and I'll speed this up in post edit. Okay, and we're back. That didn't actually take too long. One thing I will say is that it really does depend on the data store that you're actually deploying the vCenter server to as to how fast this actually happens. So if you've got a very slow single disk ESXi server in your lab, or even in production, I hope not, it can be very sluggish. So quite simply, to proceed to part 2, we click continue. As you will see in the background here, the server has now been powered on. So if I just go back to the installer, so the actual server has actually been powered on. So if we actually basically pop down here, we
can see that we can now trace route to it, and we can now ping it. So we know that our DNS record that we created is correct, and certainly from this workstation we can reach out to it. So if I just basically reach out to our host, if I can type, then we can see that the vCenter server 7 is currently up, and it can be reached from the host, and it can be reached from my workstation. Now the next portion of the setup, so the first part really actually deploys vCenter server, so it's been successfully deployed. The second part actually configures it, and all that information that we actually put in to start with is now basically uploaded to vCenter server whilst it's actually configured. So first stage has been completed, so now we click next. Yeah, I'm going to enable SSH access. In fact, actually, I think I'm going to say disable. I'm going to synchronize the time with a couple of our time servers here that are in the organization. And that's actually probably reaching out and just checking that it can actually reach those NTP servers. Okay, so this is our first SSO domain, not to be confused with an NT domain or an Active Directory domain or a domain controller. So the default is vSphere local. And again, single sign-on password. So you've got a root password for your ESXi host. You've got a root username and password for the logon of the Linux Photon vCenter Server 7 brackets appliance. And you need a super user account, your SSO account, single sign-on password account as well. Now just one mention here about these SSO passwords and root passwords. They do expire, and that can cause you in the future, if your vSphere local password expires or your root password expires, it can cause problems with your stability and workings of vCenter server. Yes, I'm going to join the customer experience improvement program, and I'm going to click finish. So just to check again, static IP address 192.168.182.136.24, our FQDN, our gateway, our DNS server, synchronize the time, and I'm going to click finish. And a warning there, you will not be able to pause or stop the install completing once you click OK. So I'm going to click OK. And it's going to sit there now basically doing the second stage of the configuration process, where it starts up all the services and actually applies configuration. So again, I'm going to disappear. I'll come back at the end, and I'll speed this up in the post. Catch you later. Okay, and we're back. That actually took a little bit. It was a little bit quicker, actually, than I thought that was going to be. So, the installation of vCenter Server 7 is complete, and you may also notice that in the background here we are VMware vCenter Server 7. Virtual machine
is actually basically running, and we've got an IP address 192.168.182.136. And if I just basically drop back, now I don't know why, but sometimes when you click this, it will open a browser, and sometimes it doesn't open a browser. It could be something specific to this particular machine or my browser that I'm using, but obviously we can click and we can copy and paste, and I'm going to try and click and see whether or not it does open up. It hasn't done, so I'm now basically just going to cut and paste that in my browser, and we've actually basically got the getting started. Launch vSphere client HTML5. Of course, in vCenter Server 7 there is no more Flex / Adobe Flash, so I'm going to click launch vCenter Server 7. One thing I would say is sometimes you may see an error message, no upstream healthy, or 503 error message. Sometimes vCenter Server 7 and all vCenter Server 6.5 and 6.7 appliances can take 15 to 30 minutes to initialize, depending upon the storage layer underneath. This is LastPass that's trying to shove credentials in, and of course remember that our SSO account, our super user account, is administrator at, if I can get the case right, administrator at vSphere local. If you went with the defaults, if you change the domain name or domain for your SSO user, then you need to basically apply that. But if you went with the default like we did in this video, vSphere.local, and of course the password. Now do remember here that there's 3 sort of passwords that you need to be managing or need to be recording or remembering. Probably documenting, putting the passwords in your documentation is probably best. Remember that we have an account called root and a password which is for our ESXi host. We then have a username called root and a password for our vCenter Server 7 Linux Photon distribution brackets appliance, and we also have our SSO account, our super user, what I like to call our super user account, administrator at the default vSphere.local password as well. Now you may sometimes see that those passwords can expire and start causing you grief, so just remember that. So I'm going to click login, and it's telling me that my credentials are incorrect. Probably fat fingers again, I would hope. So I'm going to click login. Okay, have I got something spelt wrong? Okay, and here we go. We're logging in. Okay, I don't want to basically update any of those in LastPass, and we will be greeted with the standard. Okay, so I've got a VMware VAPI endpoint service health alarm at present. We'll leave that. That might disappear of its own, of course. But the overall health basically says good. Appliance management. So that's what we'd actually basically expect to see. Our vCenter Server 7 build 179.58471. So in this Hancock's half hour, showing you how to deploy and install vCenter Server 7 brackets appliance. That's all I'm going to cover in this part today. So thanks very much for watching, and be safe out there, and all the best, and come back in part 22 when we log on to our VMware vCenter Server 7 and we start adding some hosts and creating our data center. So once again, all the best, thanks for watching, and goodbye.